Greetings and welcome once again to Word Magazine. This is Jeff Riddle, the pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. And I guess I'm trying to make up for lost time for not doing much podcasting over the last month. I've had several people ask me if I would give a reaction to some recent controversy that arose regarding Mark Ward, whom I've described as a hypercritic of the King James Version, about the comment he made in a debate that took place, I think, last week, and in which he said that it was a sin to give a copy of the King James Version to a child. And again, several people have asked me if I would give some kind of response to this. And I had thought about doing a video, I thought about writing a brief article, but yesterday, James Snapp, who is an advocate for a form of the majority text or Byzantine text, wrote, I thought, a pretty nice little response pointing out some of the problems with Mark Ward's approach to the King James Version and his attacks on its so-called insufficiencies with respect to readability. And I thought there's really no use in me reinventing the wheel. I'll just do a little review of James Snapp's article because I found a lot of things within it that I resonate with. Obviously, James Snapp and I don't have the same view on text of the Bible or translations of the Bible, but I really appreciated this little article. And especially the fact that James Snapp, unlike so many, is able to offer independent thinking. He doesn't get trapped in group thinking. There's some people out there who can't say anything negative against Mark Ward because, that's going to hurt whatever cause they're for the modern critical text or hurt their standing in the academy or something like that. And I love it when someone has an independent spirit and an autonomous spirit to be able to freely express their opinions, whether it's part of what's popular or what isn't. But maybe we should start by highlighting what the controversial statement was. So let me see if I can pull up a video version of Mark Ward's statement. I'm taking this off the Kept Pure in All Ages YouTube channel. And so this is the controversial statement that was made in this debate that was held back on October the 21st with Daniel Hafley. And the debate was about the intelligibility of the King James Version. And so here is the controversial statement that Mark Ward made in that debate.
I'm saying we've reached the point where there's a sufficient number of readability difficulties that it's time to turn away from the King James in institutional contexts. Would I say it's a sin to hand to your child? Here's what I'd say, quoting the King James: to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. What can I do, brothers and sisters, other than apply the teaching of 1 Corinthians 14? Does edification require intelligibility? If so, then, it's between you and God whether it's a sin or not, but don't do it. Don't hand unintelligible words to your children. God's words are too precious. I want to understand everything and not be misled by the Bible translations that I use.
All right. So, oops, didn't mean to replay that. That is Mark Ward's controversial statement that it would be a sin to give the King James Version of the Bible to a child because it is not intelligible, that it's not sufficiently intelligible, and so it would be sinful to give such a Bible to a child. Again, I think this is a patently, as James Snapp put it, ridiculous claim. We all know people who received the King James Bible when they were children, myself included, and it certainly did us no harm. In fact, it did us a lot of good. But there are underlying problems with Mark Ward's overall critique and attacks. He's a hypercritic of this classic English translation, classic Protestant translation of the Bible. One of those problems is that he, I think, distorts and exaggerates problems with the intelligibility of the King James Version. Another major problem is that he doesn't take into consideration issues related to text, and maybe that we'll address that on another occasion. But James Snapp Jr., I think, did us a service by giving us his assessment of Mark Ward's claims. And this was an article that was posted yesterday, October 29, 2024, and it's titled Mark Ward and His Ridiculous Claim About the King James Version. Again, I appreciate James Snapp for being an independent thinker. I really appreciate the fact that he served as a pastor. He has a Campbellite background. He served as pastor of a Christian church in Indiana, and he became a sort of self-taught, autodidactic expert in New Testament textual criticism. And one of the things I've enjoyed watching over the years in his writings about this is how he often has more knowledge than people who go off to respected universities, international universities. He has a wide range of knowledge about manuscripts and ancient versions and so forth. And he just shows what one can do with determined independent learning. And his views, again, I don't agree with them. He's not an advocate for the traditional Protestant text. I've talked about his views in the past. I think, given that he is a Campbellite, he has an anti-confessional perspective. And so I don't think, obviously, he could embrace the confessional text view because he's not confessional. But on the other hand, he has some excellent critiques of some of the problems with modern reasoned eclecticism. And so he often serves as a burr under the saddle for those who uncritically advocate modern reasoned eclecticism. And like I said, I appreciate the fact that he's an independent thinker. And that is proven in his comments here about Mark Ward, because in no way is he a KJV onlyist. If we bring the bogeyman out of the closet to scare people, he, as he says in the article, he doesn't advocate necessarily preference or use for the King James Version, but he just recognizes that Mark Ward has taken an extreme. In fact, he talks about, raises the specter of whether or not he's taking an extremist position on the King James Version. It's sort of a over-the-top antipathy towards the King James Version. In my most recent Word magazine, I read some of the comments that were there in Mark Ward's blog article, in which a couple of the persons making comments wondered whether he had an obsession with this topic. One person said perhaps he had a psychological addiction to this topic. And I do find a lot of people who have IFB backgrounds who leave that have a special passionate sort of antipathy against the Authorized Version. I didn't grow up in that. I didn't grow up with that kind of background. I grew up more in a Southern Baptist background, used the Authorized Version as a child, but came back to it as an adult, prefer its use in my public preaching, teaching ministry, and also my devotional reading. But as I pointed out, that doesn't mean I'm a KJV onlyist, as Ward has accused me and others in the confessional text movement of being. But let's just look at this article. Let me just read through it. Snapp writes, if you know me at all, you know that I am not, never have been, and never will be an advocate of King James Version onlyism. The more I study the position, the more I am tempted to completely dismiss dogmatic KJV onlyism as a schismatic and somehow cultic position that is not so much a position as a condition. Dogmatic KJV onlyists, such as Will Kinney, with whom I had a lengthy debate earlier this year, seem to confuse their simple ability to be stubborn as if it is a point in favor of their position. So no one's going to accuse James Snapp of being a KJV onlyist. But he says, this past week, I witnessed a position from the opposite camp, from a user of multiple modern versions based on the Nestle-Aland UBS compilations in the New Testament. That is, in its own way, no less extreme. He's absolutely right. People can become modern version onlyists. And I find that they express a lot of the same vitriol and demonizing of anyone who holds a preference for the authorized version that is just as pathological as some King James Version onlyists with anyone who doesn't use the King James Version. He continues, Dr. Mark Ward, an editor at Crossway, known for his blog, his editorial work at Crossway, and his book authorized the use and misuse of the King James Bible. In the course of a debate with Dr. Dan Haithley stated, if I understand him correctly, that it is a sin to give a child a King James Bible. The footage is here, and he has a link to that. We've already looked at it. Mark Ward stated the King James should be revised or replaced in institutional settings like this pulpit, like scripture memory curriculums, like Bible colleges, like revivals, even the signage outside your church. And Snapp says, so far, so good. So Snapp agrees with him in that. Obviously, I don't agree with him in that. Then Dr. Ward went on to say, there comes a point at which it's so close to this ditch that actually it is a sin for a given Bible translation to be handed to children. I'm saying we've reached the point where there's a sufficient number of readability difficulties that it's time to turn away from the King James in institutional context. Would I say it's a sin to hand to your child? Here's what I'd say, quoting the King James, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is a sin. He kept going, telling his audience, don't hand unintelligible words to your children, and it's between you and God whether it's a sin or not, but don't do it. Again, this is the controversial statement. I want to go back. I mean, Snapp is agreeing with him that the King James Version needs to be removed from institutions, and I think that's ridiculous. It's interesting in Mark Ward's critique of the Reformation Bible Society, he was raising questions about whether Dr. David Cranendonk was in agreement with our position. I wonder if Mark Ward has seen that the style guide for the Reformation Heritage books of the Puritan Reformed Journal, for which I sometimes write, that their preference for use for Bible translation, for use in quotations, is the King James Version. Is he saying that Reformation Heritage books and Puritan Reformed Journal are committing sin by promoting the use of that translation? And is he right to say it's sinful to give this translation to a child? And here I'm so thankful that James Snapp, a voice of reason, said, to which I say, ridiculous. It's time people started to call out Mark Ward for his extremist positions, and I commend James Snapp for this. He goes on to say, most New Testaments include the book of Revelation. Give 112-year-olds copies of the book of the Apocalypse of St. John and ask them to interpret chapter 13 using the contemporary English version or the English Standard Version, without assistance from ecclesiastical authorities, all on their own, and I predict that you will get 100 different interpretations. I haven't tested this suspicion. Readers are invited to test my theory, and lots of questions about the intelligibility of this piece of apocalyptic literature. He's making a fantastic point. I made a similar point when I reviewed Mark Ward's book, Authorized, and I made the point that Ward was suggesting that the Bible is read in some sort of privatized isolation. No one reads the Bible in isolation. And we expect that there will be elders in the church who will do preaching and teaching and who will aid in the intelligibility of the Bible, whatever the translation is. And this isn't an issue just for, as Snapp rightly points out, for using the authorized version. This is true for any translation, including modern ones, that intelligibility will be aided by the church, by ecclesiastical officers. He continues, we are expected to mature. With maturity comes new understanding of what was once unintelligible. We are expected to fellowship together. We are expected to learn. We should progress beyond a childhood understanding of a melodious tortoise when reading Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 12b, the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. The fact that children can read as children and misunderstand things does not render the King James Version full of shortcomings. The shortcoming is in the individual's level of comprehension, which is constantly changing. Dr. Ward seems to think that the Bible should be translated so plainly that it is incapable of being misunderstood. Unfortunately, such a translation has never existed and never will exist on earth. Ask an American 12-year-old to interpret Isaiah 10:9. King James Version, is not Calno as Carchemish, is not Hamath as Arpad, is not Samaria as Damascus. The ESV is not Calno like Carchemish, is not Hamath like Arpad, is not Samaria like Damascus, without resorting to a commentary. For that matter, ask a 20-year-old American or Canadian to interpret the verse. I predict that 99 out of 100 will say, I don't understand this. Does such a lack of understanding reflect a flaw in the translation or a lack of maturity in the individual interpreter? Surely the latter. And a lack of maturity or the characteristic of being underinformed is the real problem in what Mark Ward tries to frame as reasons not to use the King James Version over and over and over. Again, think about those comments that were made: an obsession, an addiction. In the real world, people who are determined to understand the Bible will seek out resources. He mentions a couple, and learn. Even in a fantasy realm in which children are incapable of becoming smarter and more literate and learning new things, it would not be remotely sinful to give a child a King James Version, because it is better to have some truth than none of it. I would say there's nothing wrong with giving it because you will add to his learning. You're giving him the classic translation of the Bible that has affected English language, literature, culture. I would say it's essential that you give a child the King James Version. He says, I encourage Mark Ward, come out of your fantasy land in which children never grow up and are incapable of learning new things. He mentions the fact that many Bible publishers make simplified versions of the King James Version that are marketed for younger children. I don't necessarily agree with those. I think a child simply can learn by reading the Bible. They will develop, and they can have parents explain in devotions. They can have pastors and Sunday school teachers explain at church if your church has those sorts of meetings. He says, for my part, although I prefer the New Testament in the EOB, I thought that was interesting. Snapp prefers the Eastern Orthodox Bible. Again, this shows that he doesn't have a confessional commitment that would exclude using an Eastern Orthodox Bible and prefer a Protestant Bible. And he mentions also the Evangelical Heritage Version, which would be a Protestant Bible, and the New King James and the World English Bible over the KJV New Testament. Again, I would disagree with him, but again, I appreciate his independent thinking. I would happily give the King James Bible to a child if the only other option was to give no Bible at all, which is a real scenario in some places. Exceptionally rare is the occasion when a Bible is given and the giver can perfectly foresee how accurately it will be interpreted. The act of sharing a Bible in any English translation is an act of faith that God will use it to convey his message as the reader will continue to study and learn. Some sinful perversions masquerading as translations, and he mentions things like the Passion Translation and Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation, are to be avoided by the flock of God or else used only as examples of what translators should not do. The King James Version does not fall into that category. Amen. Thank you, James Snapp. Mark Ward sometimes talks as though that the King James Version is a heretical translation. Dr. Ward, if James 3:10 implies that giving a KJV to a child is sinful because of a risk of misinterpretation, then giving a Bible, and you list various translations, to any immature person is sinful because the element of risk remains. Stop being silly. Paul told Timothy that from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures. He quotes the EHV. He seems to have regarded this as a good thing, not because he ever imagined that an infant's level of comprehension never changes, but because he trusted the Holy Spirit to work through the Scriptures to make Timothy wise unto salvation. So I'll stop there. We've worked through the article, and what I'll just say is thank you, James Snapp, for giving a thoughtful, independent assessment of Mark Ward's hypercritical approach to the King James Version. And I hope that some people's eyes are being opened to this. It's really sad to see the lack of discernment in some people who have promoted Mark Ward's viewpoints. If you're interested in hearing more of my assessment of Ward, you can go and read the review that I wrote a couple of years ago of his book, Authorized, about the King James Version. That review appeared in the Bible League Quarterly, and it's posted to myacademia.edu page. Well, I hope this short discussion has been helpful for those who are listening. I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next Word Magazine. Till then, take care, and may the Lord richly bless you.